So let me go ahead and start. First, good afternoon and welcome everyone to the Asfari Institute for Civil Society and Citizenship webinar at the American University in Beirut. Today's webinar is in collaboration with FEMENA and is titled Women of Afghanistan, My Voice to My Home. My name is Ali Haddad and we are coming to you live from Beirut and Washington, D.C. Today is the 30th of November, 2021. Before Ms. Lina Abu Habib, our director, introduces our distinguished panel, I would like to ask you to please keep your microphones on mute during the event. A small request, please. We encourage everyone to write their questions in the Q&A box ahead of time, as we might not be able to take them all due to the limited time we have. Most everyone will get a chance to have their questions answered after our panel's discussion. In addition, we at the Asfari Institute for Civil Society and Citizenship are always available to reply to our inquiries at the email provided on top of the chat box. Just to let you know, instant interpretation should have been available when you click the language preferred, and we're trying to get in touch with the interpreter to find out what happened. Hopefully she'll be able to join us very soon. In addition, we are broadcasting live, streaming live on our Asfari Institute own Facebook page. A small note, please. And if you don't mind, we have to end our event tonight at 7:50 p.m. as we would have to get ready to another event which is scheduled at 8 p.m. So we do apologize for that, and I hope you excuse the inconvenience. Many thanks to all of you, and I will go ahead and hand over to Lina to introduce our panels and get us started. Lina.
Hello, everybody. I'm not going to take a lot of time. I just want to say that this initiative came about when a couple of months ago, we realized that we have an amazing community of young women students from Afghanistan. And as Asfari Institute, our mandate is to bridge academia with civil society, with social activism. And I had, the amazing privilege to be connected and to know very well the work of Suzanne Tamasebi, my dear friend from FEMENA. And I reached out to you, Suzanne, and Suzanne, she was incredibly responsive. And we're here because Suzanne suggested an amazing idea, which is let's have a series of conversations between our young students from Afghanistan who are with us at AUB and young feminist activists from Afghanistan who may or may not be there at the time. And the idea is to talk, to connect, to understand, to see what is happening. For us, Suzanne, this is really the beginning of what I hope to be a collaboration. Oh, I just realized my video is not on. A collaboration between the American University of Beirut and FEMENA. We're hoping that through this series, this will allow us to think more together in terms of how we can connect, how we can reach out, how we can work together, continue to work together. I'm very grateful that FEMENA has mobilized its network to do this for us and for our students. I can see that most of our students are here with us. I'm very happy with that. Suzanne, you will be moderating the entire event, including later on the Q&A. May I just ask you, when you start, it would be nice to tell us a little bit more, at least for the benefit of our students, who are all amazing English speakers, for their benefit, what FEMENA does, what it stands for, and also about you. I think it would be nice to get to know you more. So over to you. I'll hand over to you and turn off the video from my end. Thank you so much. All our panelists, we're really grateful that you're with us for the benefit of our students. Suzanne, over to you, and thank you ever so much.
Thank you so much, Lina. It's really quite a pleasure to be here, and I look very much forward both to this panel, but to this collaboration so that we can connect these young students from Afghanistan who will surely have and continue to play an important role in the future of their country, with women's movement activists and women who have, been fighting for peace and for rights in Afghanistan for at least 2 decades, but probably a lot longer than that. and who've done incredible work. And I think, unfortunately, maybe not everybody in Afghanistan knows about the incredible work that women activists have done. I, as an Iranian, have watched the women in Afghanistan for many years, and I've continually been impressed by their persistence and their commitment and the level of knowledge and expertise that they bring to their work, and have just really watched the civil society in Afghanistan grow and develop and flourish into something quite amazing. And, you know, it's unfortunate that we're coming together in these times that seem rather dark, but when I speak to the Afghan women activists, I become very hopeful, because they really are insightful and they have consistently advocated for the right things. As I said, I'm Iranian. I have, you know, over 20 years of experience working to promote women's rights in the region, in Iran for about 10 years, and then regionally in Afghanistan, you know, working on Afghanistan, working on Iran, but also working in the Middle East and North Africa. So I feel very privileged that I've traveled to many of these countries and have met with women's movement activists like yourself, Lina, who are doing amazing work through the work that I've been doing since the past 10 years since I left Iran. Right now, I head an organization by the name of FEMENA, and we work to support women's movements, feminist movements in the Middle East and North Africa and Asia. We are primarily focused on countries where when the civil society space is shrinking, rapidly shrinking, where there is, you know, a conflict perhaps as well, and where the circumstances actually limit the work of women's movements in civil society and therefore have negative impact on women themselves. We've been very involved in the Afghan crisis. Actually, we started much before the Afghan crisis, when many of the women's movement activists, women who were active socially in some way, especially journalists, were targeted and were being killed and assassinated, actually right, I guess, before, but specifically after the imposed peace talks that were led unilaterally by the US, that unfortunately didn't include Afghans, Afghan government, Afghan people, Afghan civil society. So we saw an increase in violence against women who were present in the public space, and we thought that it's our duty to get involved and try to advocate for these women and elevate their voices as much as we can. So we've been very involved since then. And before then, of course, but especially since these peace talks, which really were not peace talks, they didn't bring about peace. But so I'm very happy that we're having these series of events, and I hope that through this process, both your students, but other people at AUB will get to understand the incredible work that Afghan women have done, and we can encourage people from the region, not just Iranians. I think Iranian civil society has been pretty responsive, which is great, and tried to be supportive of Afghan civil society, but really get civil society in the Arab countries to also support civil society and human rights activists in Afghanistan. We think it's essential, especially the support that's coming from countries like Qatar and Saudi Arabia. It's really critical to have women's movements in the region speaking up on behalf of women in Afghanistan. So that said, I'm going to now transition into inviting our speakers to speak. We're going to do this as a question and answer model, but I just want to make sure before we go into it, if our interpreter is actually here or not. We might have to come up with a different model of doing this if we don't have an interpreter.
May I suggest something, Suzanne? I think our interpreter was, I think it's Zubaydah recommended her. So if you have her number or something, maybe you could connect with her. But otherwise, so maybe we could do this. But otherwise, Suzanne, because this is essentially a conversation that we would like our students from Afghanistan to connect with and to engage in. So I think it's fine if it goes on. I mean, we're here, but it's fine if it goes on in Persian all the time. And maybe, like every 10, 15 minutes if you want to, give a snippet in English, but don't worry about us. The most important thing is that our young students, our young students engage, and that's why we really wanted it to be in Persian. We'll figure it out for next time. Don't worry.
Okay, great.
But Zubaida, if I may ask you, if you know the young woman, if you could just connect with her. But let's go ahead with in Persian.
اوکی. من فقط توضیح بدم که من پرسیدم راجع به ترجمه، گفتن که این مترجم متاسفانه باهاش تماس گرفتن ولی نیومده، حتما یه مشکلی براش پیش اومده. نمیدونم زبیده جانم قرار شد باهاشون یه تماس بگیره چون زبیده میشناختتش. نمیدونم تماس گرفتید زبیده جان یا الان لابا تماس میگیره. ولی در هر صورت چون این بحث قراره برای بیشتر از هر چیزی قراره برای دانشجوها باشه، دانشجوی افغان باشه، بنابراین هیچ مشکلی نیستش که شما به فارسی صحبت کنید، به دری صحبت بکنید و این ارتباط برقرار بشه. من فکر می‌کنم قبل از اینکه شروع بکنیم لینا هم گفت که 38 تا دانشجوی زن افغانستانی هستن، 3 تا مرد هستن توی این برنامه‌ای که دارن. امیدوارم که حالا همشون هم باشن، ولی اگرم نباشن حتما بعداً برنامه رو می‌بینن. I'm going to do the introductions, if it's okay, in English, and then we can have the conversations. Maybe Zubaida can speak in English, and then when we go, it's 6 DC time. Oh, so is she not able to join, or? Okay, so Zubaida wrote that she thought the event was at 6 p.m. DC time as opposed to 6 p.m. Lebanon time. Okay, so that's a problem. Okay, so then we'll go at it in this way. I don't know, maybe yes, and I'll do a little synopsis of what Mobina says so that you have an understanding of what she says, because she has incredible experience. But I'll do the introductions in English so that other people who maybe don't speak Farsi can follow, at least see how incredible our speakers are. So Zubaida Akbar is a leading women's rights and civil society activist from Afghanistan. She has over a decade of experience working inside Afghanistan to promote equality, women and children's rights, and democracy. She is currently based in the US, close to where I live, where she has lived since 2018. Zubaida works with Freedom Now, which is an organization which protects individuals and communities from government repression and defends human rights through direct legal support, advocacy, capacity building, and analysis. Zubaida also serves on the advisory board of FEMENA, my organization, which works to support women human rights defenders, including Afghan women human rights defenders and feminist movements. Zubaida has been deeply involved in addressing the recent crisis in Afghanistan. And throughout her career, Zubaida has worked with various international organizations inside and outside of Afghanistan as a communication, campaign, and advocacy expert. And she holds an undergraduate degree in law and political science. I will add that really Zubaida has been critical in the work that FEMENA did to support Afghan women human rights defenders, and a really valuable part of our team in doing this. And she did it all on a voluntary basis as part of our efforts. Mobina Sai is an award-winning journalist from Balkh province in northern Afghanistan, from Mazar Sharif, actually. She worked as a journalist, producer, and director of a private radio station for 13 years. For the past 6 years, she served as a manager of NAY, which is an organization focused on building and supporting open and strong media in Afghanistan. As a manager at NAY, Mobina was responsible for supporting open media, including provision of training to media professionals in 5 of the northern provinces of Afghanistan. Additionally, Mobina was a member of several committees and networks focused on promoting human rights, women's rights, and children's rights, and ensuring the rule of law in Afghanistan. She has received multiple national and international awards for her human rights and women's rights work. She holds a BA in journalism. We're very pleased to have you both at this event. And I think, the interesting thing with this panel is that we're asking Zubaida to sort of provide a more general picture of the situation in Afghanistan, and then Mobina to sort of go down a little bit and talk about what's going on in the provinces, because I think you all often hear about the difference between the provinces and Kabul, to see what the situation of women is and what the women's movements have done in both places. So my first question is actually to Zobeida. Zobeida Jan, can you tell us how the Afghan women's movement has developed and worked over the past 20 years to bring about peace, to end violence against women, and to ensure women's rights? What was the position of the women's movement with respect to the US initiated peace talks with the Taliban? So what have they done and how did they react to those talks? What were their concerns, fears, or, what were they excited about maybe?
Thank you so much, Susan John, for the kind introduction, and everyone for letting me to have this opportunity to speak. It is wonderful to be here. I want to start by saying that the fight of Afghan women for their rights goes beyond the past 20 years. The country was under the rule of the Taliban 20 years ago, and women were fighting for their rights back then. They had started underground classes to teach girls, and they were doing what they could do with very limited access or no access to the world. They were still fighting for their education. What's sad is that 20 years later, they have to do that all over again. They have to fight for the rights of girls to go back to school. But the times are different now. They have more access to the world. They are able to raise their voices, and they are hoping to be heard. But what happened during the past 20 years was it continued to be a fight. It was not, they didn't have everything. It was not an ideal situation, but what they had was they had political participation. They were present in parliament, in the cabinet, in provincial councils, and political parties. They were present in media. They were active in arts and cultures. There were artists and singers. Women were teaching. Women were going to school. Women were attending universities. They were present in the society. None of it was easy, but they were on the path to move forward. It was not an easy path. They were still fighting every day. The country was still under attack by the Taliban. The people who claim to be the government of Afghanistan right now, they continued to kill Afghans during the past 20 years to come to power. They attacked universities, they attacked women's organizations, they attacked civil society members, they attacked schools. But despite all of that, Afghan women would wake up every day, go to work, and continue their fight and move forward. So no amount of killing women, journalists, activists stopped women from fighting. And that's what we continue to see today. Even though that now the Taliban are back to power, that's what we see from Afghan women, their resilience and their willingness to continue to fight. And I think what's not in their favor right now is the dominant narrative that the Afghan people gave in, that they didn't fight enough, that their country ended up in the situation that it did because they were not united in this fight. And that's, I think, this is an opportunity. Even this situation, we the Afghan women, we are taking this as an opportunity to tell our story, to tell that this was we never given. We continued before the US invasion. We were fighting before the US invasion of Afghanistan. We continued the fight during the past 20 years. Nothing was handed over to Afghan women by the US during the past 20 years. We were fighting every day to get to work, to continue being present in the society. And now we are continuing the fight. And the Afghan women had continued to raise their voices during the peace negotiations. Susanjana, as you mentioned, the Afghan women's organizations and movements mobilized to talk about how the Taliban could not be trusted, that we had lived experience of being under the rule of the Taliban, and that we continued to be attacked during the past 20 years, and that it's not okay to trust them and to bring them back to power. That the women should be included in these negotiations, and that their demands needed to be heard. They were not heard. That's why we are here today. But women didn't stop. They continued to fight. What we see in Afghanistan today, right now, is the continuation of that fight. It's not something brand new. It's not something that didn't exist before. Today, women in Afghanistan are protesting every day when they can, when they are not arrested, when they are not attacked, when they are not lashed. Despite those fears, of being killed by the Taliban, being arrested by the Taliban, they go out on the streets and they ask for their rights. This is Afghan women. This is how I have always known Afghan women. This is what we do. They lash us, we get back up, we continue to fight. They hit us, they arrest us, they detain us, they point their guns at us, we get up, we go back out on the streets and we fight. And I think this is the hopeful story of Afghanistan that needs to be promoted, needs to be elevated, and needs to be, people need to stand with this. This is what needs to be heard.
Thank you, Zubaydah Jan. I asked Shiva if she could write just very synopsis of what you say to make sure that Mobina understands what what you said. من نمیدونم از شیوا خواهش کردم که یک کوتاه از سخنرانی زبیده جان برای شما بنویسه. مبینا جان نمیدونم تونست بنویسه، ولی کلا زبیده جان در واقع تعریف کرد که زنان افغانستان سالهاست قبل از ورود آمریکا به افغانستان دارن مبارزه میکنن، در اون زمان مبارزه کردن، الان هم دارن مبارزه میکنن و آمریکا هیچی به زنان افغانستانی نداده. خود زنان افغان بودن که همه فرصت ها رو برای خودشون به دست آوردن و توضیح هم دادش که زنان افغانستان نگران مذاکرات صلح بودن با طالبان و همواره گفتن که نمیشه به طالبان اعتماد کرد، برای اینکه طالبان علیه ما خشونت اعمال میکنه و همون طالبانی هست که سالها پیش باش تجربهش رو داشتیم که حالا الان هم میبینیم که حرفشون درست بود، ولی کلا زبیده جان گفتن هنوز هم همون زنها هستن که دارن مبارزه میکنن و هر چقدر شلاق بخورن و کتک بخورن باز وای میستن و ایستادگی میکنن و مبارزه میکنن. فقط یه توضیح بدم که اگر که شما بدونین که زبیده جان چی گفتن. حالا من سوال از شما میپرسم، اول انگلیسی میپرسم بعدش فارسی میپرسم که همه متوجه بشن و من اگه شما همینجوری که برای شما خلاصه کردم برای دوستان دیگه هم خلاصه میکنم. بنابراین سوال من اول انگلیسی میگم. So Mobina, I'm going to say the question in English, then I'm going to say it in Farsi, and I'm going to try to provide a synopsis of what Mobina says in English to our English-speaking audiences. So, Mobina Jan, many people who have advocated for the return of the Taliban or for peace with Taliban during those same peace talks that the Afghan women were objecting to claim that the objection and fears of the women's groups were largely demands of a privileged and westernized group of Kabul-based women. So what I want you to do is to tell us what women activists were doing in the provinces these past 20 years. And similar to the provinces that you worked with, you know, the one that you lived in Balkh province, but the other northern provinces and other provinces that you were familiar with. And why was their work important? And then is the violence that we've witnessed from the Taliban in the past and in the present truly the culture of Afghans and therefore deserved, as some Taliban supporters and Western analysts have claimed? سوال من به شما اینه مبینا جان، کسایی که طرفدار این مذاکرات صلح بودن و حالا میشه گفت تا یه حدی هم طرفدار طالبان بودن، این اعتراضات زنان به برگشت طالبان رو نادیده گرفتند و میگفت توجیه میکردن و میگفتن که این زنانی که دارن اعتراض میکنن در واقع یک سری زنان مرفهی هستن که باورهاشون اعتقاداتشون غربی هستش و اکثرا در کابل هستند. من سوالم از شما اینه، آیا میشه برای ما توضیح بدین که زنان فعالان زنان در ولایت ها مثل ولایت بلخ و اون 5 ولایتی که شما باهاش کار میکردین و ولایت های دیگه در واقع چی کار میکردند و چرا کارش برای احقاق حقوق زنان و چرا کارشون مهم بود؟ آیا این خشونتی که ما الان شاهدش هستیم که از جانب طالبان در افغانستان رواج داره، آیا واقعا این فرهنگ مردم افغانستانه، فرهنگ طالبان فرهنگ مردم افغانستان، همونجوری که خیلی از این بعضی از این تحلیلگران غربی یا طرفداران طالبان گفتن و سعی کردن توجیه بکنن که شرایط فعلی رو و این مذاکرات صلح و حکومت طالبان رو، آیا واقعا این فرهنگ هست و فرهنگ زنانی که اعتراض می‌کردن فرهنگ خارجی هست اگر که میشه این رو برای ما توضیح بدین، میتونین صحبت بکنین، حالا هر 3-4 جمله یه دفعه اگر که صبر بکنین، من خلاصه کوتاه میگم به انگلیسی که دیگران هم بدونن که شما چی میگین، چون حرفتون خیلی خیلی مهمه، برای اینکه خیلی ها راجع به 2 تا افغانستان حرف زدن، دو نوع زنان کابل که متفاوت و غربی هستن و زنان دیگر که فرهنگشون خیلی شبیه به فرهنگ طالبان هست.
تشکر. سلام به شما سوسن جان عزیز، دوستانی که اینجا در برنامه هستند. تشکر از اینکه فرصت صحبت و گفتمان در مورد زنان امروزی و وضعیتی که زنان در افغانستان دارن مساعد ساخته. ما به ادامه صحبت دوست عزیزم زبیده جان میگم بودیم که متاسفانه زنان افغانستان در طی 100 سال گذشته 3 بار دچار بحران هویتی شدن و 3 بار خواسته شد که عمدن و قصدن زنان از تمام صحنه‌های سیاسی، اجتماعی، اقتصادی و تعلیمی و آموزشی بدور شوند. دوستان ما حتما در تاریخ مراجعه کردن. تاریخ 100 سال گذشته افغانستان نشان میده که در زمان شاه امان الله خان هم زنان 1 بار در سال 1964 در قانون برابریشان و امتیازات برابرشان با مردان به تصویب رسید که متاسفانه جامعه سنتی وقت و سیاست مرد سالارانه در افغانستان اجازه نداد که زنان بیاین به خواستهای انسانیشان برسند. بعد ما آمدیم متاسفانه 20 سال قبل هم در زمان که اولین بار طالبان آمدن حکومت کردن در افغانستان شاهد همچون یک وضعیت بودیم. اما این به این عنوان نیست که زنان امروز افغانستان دیگه زنان 100 سال قبل یا 20 سال قبل باشن. اگر کسی ادعا میکنه که زنانی که اعتراض میکنن یا اعتراض کردن و ادامه داره این صدای عدالت خواهی زنان در افغانستان به نحو زنان غرب زده یا افکار برداشته شده از غرب در افغانستان، یا بهتر بگوییم یک اصطلاح رایج در داخل افغانستان دیدگاه پروژه‌ای از در افغانستان که در مقابل یک مقدار پول هزینه میاد این صدا بلند میشه، کلا یک دیدگاه اشتباه است. ما در جریان 20 سال هم در افغانستان تنها در کابل نه، در تمام ولایات صدای عدالت‌خواهی زنان در عرصه‌های مختلف داشتیم. ما همیشه همواره در مورد خشونت علیه زنان اعتراض داشتیم، گردنمایی داشتیم، راهپیمایی داشتیم، برنامه‌ها داشتیم، کار می‌کردیم و از حکومت وقت هم می‌خواستیم که توجه بیشتر در وضعیت حقوقی زنان داشته باشه، در وضعیت سیاسی اقتصادی زنان داشته باشه. متاسفانه با سقوط نظام جمهوریت در افغانستان و وضعیت پیش آمده این به این معنا نشد که زنان خاموش باشند. زنانی که در کابل صدا بلند کردند در نخستین روزهایی که طالبان حکومت کردند یا طالبان حکومت سقوط دادند، زنانی که در سایر ولایات آمدن صدا بلند کردن، این یک هدف مشترک بوده، یک هدف مشترک به خاطر طلب حق خود زنان هست، نه یک دیدگاه غربی. زنی که 20 سال در افغانستان درس خوانده، زنی که 20 سال در کنار خانوادهش، تربیت فرزندش، مسئولیت‌های خودش و خانوادهش آمده درس سیاست خوانده، درس مدیریت خوانده، کار کرده، زحمت کشیده، تلاش کرده، خود در موقف رسانده، امروز اون نمیتونه خاموش باشه. او زن نمیتونه که صدا بلند نکنه. پس صدایی که شما در ولایت افغانستان میشنوین، صدایی که در مرکز افغانستان کابل میشنوین و اعتراضات را که شما از طریق رسانه ها شاهدش هستین، تمام از اینا صدای مشترک زنان افغانستان به خاطر عدالت خواهی است.
من میتونم الان یه کوتاه صحبتش ما رو سعی میکنم که
ما طولانی صحبت کردیم.
So I'm going to translate just slightly. So basically, Mobina said that, just really stressed what Zubaydah had explained and said that women in Afghanistan over the last 100 years have experienced these 3 different crises. One, in 1964, women were guaranteed equality in the law, but unfortunately the patriarchal system prevented that from happening. And then we saw the emergence of Taliban, which was a major crisis for women. But women today are very different than they were 25 years ago when the Taliban first came to power. So they're not, they've had 20 years of experience, 20 years of advocating for justice, 20 years of being present in the public sphere. So they're not going to take this imposition of this level of violence and elimination from the public sphere in the same way that they had in the past. Not that they had also fought for it in the past, but now they're much more determined to fight for it. Women have been calling for justice throughout Afghanistan for decades now. This is not a Western call, and it's clearly not a project-based call, which many women's movement activists have been, or many members of the women's movement have been accused of. They've been accused of they've been accused that their calls for justice are part of projects that are being funded by the West. So Mobina wants to stress that in the provinces, as well as in Kabul, women have demanded justice consistently. They have even asked the previous government for justice to make sure that women had social opportunities, that their rights were adhered to, and that they had opportunities in the political sphere. And now, with the Taliban's emergence, now you have women, younger women who have 20 years where they've been studying and they've been active in the public sphere, and it's very difficult to push them back. And the call for justice during and the calls against Taliban, they were not a Kabul-based call. They really were a call for justice from women all across Afghanistan. And we see that today now as well, is that women are calling for justice throughout Afghanistan, whether it's in the provinces or not. میخوای ادامه بدی یا تموم شد؟
فقط یک اشاره کوتاه دیگه به اجازه شما. زنانی که امروز صدا بلند میکنن زنانی هستن که در طی 20 سال اینا مزایای درس، تحصیل و حق خودشان دانستن. زنانی هستن که با جهان در ارتباط هستن. یک زنی که در 10 سال گذشته، 20 سال گذشته درس خوانده، در یک موقف رسیده با یک برنامه یا یک هدفی به خاطر خدمت به مردم و به خاطر تبارز هویت زن بودنش در جامعه خواست از خود نشان بده، چگونه امروز تحمل کنه، بپذیره و قبول کنه که مثلا دختر جوانش در خانه هست، دروازه دانشگاه برایش بسته هست. دختر جوانش یا کودکانش در خانه هست، دروازه‌های مکتب برای دختران بسته هست. اداره‌ای که کار میکرد امروز اجازه نمیده که بره کار کنه و از اون اهدافش و از تلاش‌هاش بدور بمانه. پس یک زن افغانستانی به این دیدگاه و به این نتیجه رسیده که بیایه به خاطر بعد از آوردن آرمان‌های خودش و دختران و زنان سرزمینش صدا بلند کنه. درست قبل در مزار زنانی آمدن صدا بلند کردن، گفتن که از جامعه جهانی میخواین حکومت طالبان به رسمیت نشناسن. و مطمئن هستم که امروز در افغانستان همه میدونن نه پروژه هست، نه مؤسسه است و نه سازمان کار میکنن. اما این زنها آمدن نه تنها صدا بلند کردن، بلکه کمک‌های ناچیزی را که در سرمای زمستان به خانواده غریب و فقیر داشتن بر از اون کمک خودم رساندم. یک احساس است، یک هدف است، یک صدا هست که بلند میشه. سپاس.
So Mobina wants to stress that, you know, the last 20 years women have had the opportunities to study, be present in the public sphere, to take on working opportunities, and it's very difficult, you know, the advances that they have achieved for them to sit back and now see that their daughters are not able to go to university, that their girls are not able to go to school. It's very difficult for them to see that and to stay silent. So this is what they're advocating for. And 2 days ago, we saw in Mazar Sharif that we saw women protesting again in Mazar Sharif. And what they asked for was from the international community to not recognize the Taliban as the rulers of Afghanistan, will not give them official status, and to, you know, and I'm adding this, that actually women in Afghanistan have been asking for this all along, is that they have said that nobody should recognize the Taliban, and women's rights and human rights should be a precondition for any sort of negotiation. So I think that's really important. So I think, is there somebody here for interpretation, or somebody is joining us for interpretation?
I see somebody called Khatira, but let's continue, Suzanne.
Okay. All right, I'm just looking at the notes, so I just wanted to make sure that if there is somebody that joined us, we would be able to do it. So I'm asking my second question from Zobeida. Zobeida John, tell us what women activists, many of them outside the country, because their lives were threatened, are doing to raise public awareness about the situation of women and minorities in Afghanistan. How do you rate the response of the international community? So I know this is something that you've been involved in a lot the last few months. So please let us know what the women's groups are doing outside the country, and, you know, how the international community has responded.
I want to start by saying how inspired I am by all the Afghan human rights defenders who were forced out of the country and are in different military camps, refugee camps across the world. And despite everything that they're going through, they prioritize showing up on the media, showing up on panel discussions, showing up on events, and talking about Afghanistan, talking about the situation. That speaks for the fact that if they had any hope of being able to continue their work in Afghanistan, they would not leave, that they would stay behind and they would continue their fight. That speaks for the fact that we are actually dealing a brutal terrorist group that would kill these women who were, if they were in Afghanistan. Their offices were raided, their homes were raided, they were chased, they were literally forced out of the country. And now they're sitting in refugee camps and in military camps across the world, not knowing what's coming next for them, and they're still speaking up for Afghanistan. And they're doing that by showing up in media interviews, by attending events, by participating in panel discussions, by telling the truth story of Afghanistan, by telling what actually is it that we have lost. Because in the past 20 years, we fought every day to gain our right to education, our right to work, our right to political participation, our right to social activism, our right to just be present in the public spaces. And now all of that has disappeared. And yet we are not letting go. We are fighting. If we are sitting in a refugee camp somewhere, if we are sitting in our homes outside of the country, if we are, no matter the situation, we are speaking up and we are asking for the world to listen to us, just the way we did during the peace negotiations. And they didn't listen to us. During the peace negotiations, the voices of the Taliban were more elevated, much more heard than our voices, than what we asked for. We warned the world. We said that these are terrorists, that they're not going to be able to lead a country, that they're going to kill Afghans who don't agree with them, that they're going to chase women rights activists, that they have no respect whatsoever for the ethnic diversity of Afghanistan. And now we see that. Now there are reports of Hazaras getting killed, women getting chased, members of the government getting killed. Everything that we had warned the world about is happening, and these women continue to speak out about it. Not only outside the country, even inside the country, they're risking their lives and they're saying that this is not okay. They're not asking for food. They're not asking for humanitarian aid. The first and foremost thing the Afghan people are asking for is justice. And that this is not okay, that the people who once killed us and who continue to kill us are now ruling us. And we will not accept this. We will not want them to be recognized. This is inspiring to me, and this is what Afghan women are doing. But they're facing challenges. The most major challenge that we are facing is not only that we have to speak up about our truth and fight for it, we have to fight to be heard by the world. The world is choosing to listen to mainstream media that tells us that Taliban are back and they're fine, and that then they're the new reality of Afghanistan, and that we need to find ways to work with them. While for me, and for many Afghans who have lost their loved ones and family members to the Taliban attacks, and we still don't feel safe under their rule, we want justice. We want accountability. We want the world to listen to us. So we are fighting two wars. We are fighting the narrative that is taking over versus our truth and our reality that tells us that the Taliban are fine, that the new government, that their government, whatever it is, that it should be accepted and people need to find ways to work around it and figure it out. And we have to fight to tell our story. And this is not fair to us. And I think the expectation of women who are fighting in Afghanistan right now and abroad is, let us speak on our behalf, elevate our voices, don't tell our stories. We know how to tell our stories. We know what we want. And don't create another obstacle for us by promoting narratives that normalize the Taliban. That's not okay. That's not acceptable.
I would like to give me 1 second to please interfere right now and say that Miss Wadia did come through, send us a friend of hers, and my colleague Fatme was able to get in touch with Ms. Ahmadi Zoe, and Ms. Khatira is currently right now available to interpret on the channel. It says English to Arabic. Please do excuse me because they will not let me assign Farsi again. But the channel says English to Arabic, but it is English to Farsi, and interpretation is available right now. And I thank you for everything. And by the way, I'm so fascinated with what I'm here with everyone. So thank you, everybody. And I'll go ahead and step out right now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ellie. Thank you. مبینه جان شما متوجه شدین الان ترجمه هست. اگر که برین روی اینترپریتیشن بزنین به عربی رو انتخاب بکنین اونجا فارسی میشنوین. خانم خاطره عزیز خیلی خوش آمدید. تشکر که به ما پیوستید. مبینه جان شما ست هستین؟ فارسی میشنوین الان؟
هنوز نه.
هنوز نه. بذار منم برم روی عربی ببینم. الان ترجمه هست؟ الان صداتون رو میشنوم. بله. الان صداشون رو میشنویم مبینه جان؟
هنوز من باید همون گزینه رو ببینم.
پیدا کردی گزینه رو؟
فارسی؟
عربی.
مبینه جان یک آیکون کره زمین است، گلوبک. سر از او کنین براتون گزینه عربی و انگلیسی را میده. شما انتخاب کنین.
بله. عربی رو باید انتخاب کنم؟
عربی. بله. الان درست شد؟
انتخاب کردیم. باید صدایشون رو بشنوم. صدایتون رو میشنوم. سلام خاطر جان. بله.
Thank you so much. This is great. So the rest of our conversation can be without my limited or whatever, my incomplete interpretation. Mobina Jan, tell us a little bit about what the women in Afghanistan are doing now, and especially in the provinces. How are they resisting the violence and the discrimination that the Taliban are imposing on Afghanistan? I think you talked about some of the protests. We've seen protests from day one. And tell us why these protests are important. Why are they significant, the protests by women?
بله خاطر جان تشکر. من ترجمه که خاطر جان داشتن. اول اینی که زنها در تمام افغانستان امروز از تمام حقوق انسانیشون برخوردار نیستن، متاسفانه محروم از تمام مزایای انسانی که حالا یک انسان میتونه درس بخونه، تحصیل کنه، زندگی آرام و دور از نگرانی داشته باشه، کار داشته باشه و یک لقمه نان برای خوردن، که در افغانستان متاسفانه امروز زنان و خصوصا زنانی که سرپرست خانوادهشان هستند، زنانی که مرد ندارن، کار ندارن، نان ندارن، یک نگرانی کلان در افغانستان است. در پهلوی ازی هزاران دختری که از دانشگاه به دور ماندن، از تحصیل، هزاران دختری که از مکتب به دور ماندن به خاطر ادامه درس و مکتب و اینا تمامش از مشکلات است که در داخل افغانستان دارن. یک موضوع دیگری روز قبل در افغانستان زنان اعتراض کردن، نبود یک سالمولی معنی خشونت که قبلا برای زنان داشتیم امروز نداریم. این هم یک مشکل کلان حقوقی است که متاسفانه زنان در افغانستان دارند. یعنی زنان در افغانستان با وضعیتی هستند که نه اونا دارای یک حقوق انسانی و آموزان بودنشون در جامعه تضمین شدن، نه اونا کار دارن، نه اونا نان دارن و نه کسی هم توجه میکنن. به هر حال اینا صدا بلند میکنن، ما صدا بلند میکنیم، ما اعتراض میکنیم، ما به جهانیان میفهمانیم که اگر شما گوش شنوا ندارین، ما این صداها را تا اندازه بلند میکنیم که شما بشنوید. اگر نشنیدن جهانیان و با تعاملات سیاسی خودشان خواستن که منطقه را در اختیارشان بگیرن و از یک حقوق انسانی زنان محروم کنن، فرقی نمیکنه. ما به نسل‌های آینده ما میخوایم بفهمانیم که ما بودیم، ما صدا بلند کردیم، ما به خاطر حق خود ما زنده هستیم و ما نمیخوایم قربانی خشونت‌های سیاسی در افغانستان باشیم، قربانی خشونت‌های جنگی در افغانستان باشیم.
من نمیدونم که خاطر جان چی شد، مشکل فکر میکنم که کار نکرد، یعنی صدای شما رو حداقل ما داشتیم، فقط صدای مبینا جان رو داشتیم. ببخشید در هر صورت برای دوستان. خاطر جان هستین شما؟
من صدای شما رو میشنم خاطر جان.
خاطر جان شما باید انگلیش سویچ کنین، وقتی که از انگلیسی به فارسی ترجمه میکنین چنل تانو باید سویچ کنین. شما در عربی بودین.
اگه میتونین یه خلاصه به انگلیسی بگین که همه بدونن که جان چی گفتن و سوال بعدی. من یه سوالی هم دارم از مبینا، همینجا میخوام بپرسم. مرسی.
Suzanne, I'm sorry for this problem with the, let's continue as if there's no interpretation. Let's continue and don't bother about doing a summary. You can do a summary at the end, but I really don't want to lose any moment from this conversation.
That's all right. Okay, so Khatira can do a very quick summary right now. میتونین خاطر جان خیلی کوتاه بگین. Thank you, Khatira Jan. So, Mobina Jan, my question, very more specific question to you is this. You were actually in Afghanistan when Taliban came, and we saw these women organizing in protests, and it was really very frightening. Can you just tell us a little bit about that? How, you know, how, what level of really, I think, what level of bravery does it take for women to stand up to Taliban who are, you know, armed in that way? I mean, I think the world really watched, but you were there. So just tell us a little bit from that personal, just a couple of minutes to sort of paint that picture for us, if you can.
سوسن جان عزیز، من سوال گرفتم، خدا کنه که تمام سوالم این قدر باشد. وضعیت اعتراضات زنان که چقدر میتونه تاثیرگذار باشه منظور شما می بود. ما پیشترم در فهم گفتم زنان افغانستان امروز سکوت مطلق جامعه جهانی را درک میکنن که هیچ کس حمایتشان نمیکنن. به نحو ذهنیت داده میشه که اعتراض جایی را نمیگیره، بالاخره یک روز اینا خسته میشن. اما فراموش نکنین که این اعتراضات بی صدا نمیمونه. ما امروز صدها زن هم صدا در جهان داریم. اگر دولت‌هایشان توجه نکردن، نتونستن یک فشار بالای رهبران طالبان در افغانستان بیارن و به خاطر حقوق زنان افغانستان امروز تلاش کنن، صدها زن دیگر ما در جهان داریم مظاهرات را که شما در کشورهای مختلف همصدا با زنان افغان شاهد هستین، این شب و روز در این 3 ماه کمتر و بیشتر ادامه داره. این نشان میده که حداقل ما صدای ما را توانستیم برای امنه و ما برسانیم، برای اونایی که به خاطر حقوق ما فکر میکنن، نگران هستن و میخواین که زنای افغانستان حداقل به ما حق و آزادی‌های انسانیشان برسن. ما به این باور داریم و به این باورمندی ماست که ادامه میدیم.
تشکر میکنم. Zubaydah Jan, so my question now to you is how is international women's organizations, how can the international women's organizations, especially those in the West, support the Afghan women's movement in their demands? I know you've been involved in some of these events and have been talking to the international women's movement. So what can we do based internationally to support you guys? And I think also it's really important that you talk about how solidarity, what does solidarity really mean? What does it look like?
Thank you, Susan John. I think the first and foremost thing is to acknowledge the Afghan women protesting inside and outside Afghanistan as the reality of Afghanistan, not the Taliban. I think we need the international human rights organizations, women's rights organizations, to see us and our fights and our struggle for our rights as the reality of Afghanistan, not the Taliban, unlike what has been being promoted in the mainstream media and by their governments. Next would be to stand in solidarity with Afghan women in their fights against a terrorist group. We are fighting this fight against terrorists on behalf of women across the world. To think that the Taliban being in Afghanistan will only oppress women Afghan and that they're going to be fine is naive. I think this is much broader than what, like their oppression is much broader, and the way they will impact women will not be just women in Afghanistan. It will be much broader. And what we are doing right now in Afghanistan, Afghan women doing in Afghanistan and Afghan women doing across the world, how they are speaking up against the atrocities of the Taliban and the true face of the Taliban, we are doing this on behalf of women across the world. And the international human rights organizations and women's rights organizations need to join us and need to stand in solidarity with us, not just for Afghan women. It's not to save us, because we clearly don't need that. We fought the Taliban and their atrocities during the past 20 years, and we are continuing to do that right now. Even though the world has chosen to turn a blind eye and not look at us, we are doing it. Women, they say that they will walk out again tomorrow and they fight, and they'll keep doing this every day. So it's not about saving women, paying attention to them so that they can so that they are saved. It's about doing this for all of us as women across the world. And then to elevate their demands, to elevate what women are asking for right now, because what we hear in the media from the Taliban, when they say they respect women's rights and that they're thinking about reopening schools and they have these conditions and that conditions and that in principle they are okay with women's Islamic rights and whatever, don't believe that. Believe Afghan women when they say they're being attacked every day. Believe Afghan women journalists when they say they cannot go back to work right now. Believe Afghan women teachers who are at home stuck right now. I think we should believe what we see from the Taliban, not what they say when in their media presence. The other thing that international women's rights organizations can do is let us speak on our own behalf. When there are panel discussions about Afghanistan, don't speak on our behalf. There are enough Afghan women inside and outside the country who can talk about the situation, who can tell their lived experience of living under the Taliban, who can talk about what we really have been through in our fight against terrorism. So we can speak for ourselves. Just bring us to those platforms, allow us to be there. And then advocate with your governments, urge your governments to not contribute to erasing women. Your governments are meeting with the Taliban on a daily basis. They continue to meet with the Taliban in full male delegations. They're erasing women. There are no women in delegations of these Western governments in the Taliban. It's on these women's rights organizations to advocate that women need to be present, that we don't, that as those who claim to believe in human rights and women's rights, the first thing that you do is that you have women in your delegation when you're meeting with the Taliban. If you're engaging with them, engage in a woman-led delegation. And also to advocate for evacuating Afghans who are at risk, human rights defenders who are at risk. Advocate for visas for them, because despite all of our fight, the fights won't stop. Afghan women will continue fighting, whether they're in Afghanistan or abroad, but their lives are at risk. And it's important that they find safety, that they are evacuated. And if there is a space for you to advocate for more visas for Afghan women human rights defenders, please do that, because there are many who are left behind. There are many obstacles to evacuating Afghan human rights defenders right now, especially if they come from marginalized ethnic groups. They literally cannot visit the passport department to renew their passports because they can be detained by the Taliban. They can be killed by the Taliban. And they're stuck, they're in hiding. All these other people are getting evacuated, but many whose lives are at risk and are in hiding because of strict evacuation rules and requirements, they are not able to leave the country. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zubaydah Jan. I just wanted to say something to that effect. Yes, the lives of women human rights defenders in Afghanistan have been at risk for some time. They have been targeted consistently by the Taliban for some time now. And just I think a couple of weeks ago, another Afghan women's rights defender, Furuzan Safi, was assassinated, was murdered. If you look at our Twitter page, our Instagram page, for the 16 Days of Violence, FEMENA did a video, a very nice video that actually our colleague Shiva, who's here, she made the video, but talking about how women human rights defenders are getting killed across the region. And the situation in Afghanistan is especially bleak. We've had, and Afghan women activists have been telling me, we've never had women being killed at this level. We've never had women targeted and killed to this degree. And this really started with the peace talks. So I think it's really important, those points that you made, Zubaydah Jan. My last question is to Mobina, and then we can move into, maybe a a more direct conversation where the audience and the students can ask questions. But my question to Mobina is this, and I'll say it in Farsi too, just to make sure that she gets it, the translation is right, but I'll say it in English first. What do you expect from women in the region? I know you've been involved in some regional efforts. The Iranian women's groups inside the country, I'm very proud of them, set up a group. And Mobina was one of the first people who joined that group to see how they can support Afghan women. So you've been involved in that effort. What do you expect from women in, women's movements in Afghanistan's neighboring countries like Iran, Pakistan? What can they do? And then what do you expect from women's movements in the region, especially in Arab countries? What do you expect in countries like Qatar, because Qatar and Turkey also support Taliban? They're the political allies of Taliban. What can women's movements there do? سوال من این بودش که مبینا جان، شما توی گروه منطقه‌ای بودین، تو اون گروهی که ایرانی‌ها تشکیل دادن برای حمایت از زنان افغانستانی. بر حسب اون تجربه شما خواستتون از مطالبتون از زنان منطقه چی هستش؟ به طور خاص کشورهای همسایه افغانستان، جنبش زنانی که توی پاکستان یا ایران هستن، و بعد جنبش زنان در منطقه کشورهای عربی و به خصوص مثلا کشوری مثل قطر یا ترکیه که در واقع یه جوری حامیان طالبان هستن. جنبش زنان توی این کشور چیکار میتونن بکنن که خواسته های شما رو مطرح بکنن؟
تشکر سوسن جان. اول اینکه زنان منطقه اتفاقا مشکلات مشترک دارن، مشکلات حقوقی، سیاسی، فرهنگی مشترک در جامعه خود دارن، چون کشورهای اسلامی و سیاست‌هایی که در اونجا رایج است و نحو منبع سیاست و فتواهای خود بر علیه زنان از دین میگیرن و از متون دینی میگیرن. یک پیامی بوده همیشه برای زنان منطقه، اولی که با هم صدا شویم و بیاییم این برداشت‌های اشتباه از دین که سیاست از آن استفاده میکنه و مردان به خاطر خودشان بیشتر میخواین که مورد سوء استفاده قرار بدن دین را، ما بیاییم بر اساس آگاهی خود ما، همصدایی خود ما، اتفاق نظر خود ما روی از این سیاست‌ها یک خط بطلان بکشیم. با صدای ما، با جنبش‌های زنانه، با صدای عدالت‌خواهی با همصدایی زنان جهان ثابت کنیم که ما هم میدانیم که اینجا دین نه بلکه پروژه های سیاسی مردانه دارن کار میکنن، حالا در کشورهای اسلامی، در کشورهای منطقه، کشورهای همسایه در افغانستان. اما یک موضوع دیگر نادیده نگیریم که زنان ایران حداقل یا زنان پاکستان یا زنان کشورهای عربی امروز، البته دیروز زنان افغانستان نمیگم، امروز باز هم وضعیت بهتر از زنان افغانستان دارن. قطر، کشورهای عربی که به نحوی از طالبان حمایت میکنن، زنان بیشتری در دستگاه سیاسی و حکومتی خودشان دارن که ما خبر داریم اونا کار میکنن. اونا بر زنانشان حق تحصیل میتن و تمام امتیازات و حقوق سیاسی و تحصیلی را برشان میتن، حقوق کار میتن. اما در داخل افغانستان مردان سیاستگزار به نام طالب میرن در بیرون با همین سیاست‌های کلان صحبت میکنن، حمایتشان را میگیرن و هیچ حاضر نیستن که از اون نظامی که در داخل کشورهایشان دارن حتی اقل به عنوان یک الگو بیاین برای زن افغانستانی هم حق قائل شدن. دو تا پیام داره. پیام اولی که بیاین ما با هم صدا شدیم، بیاین ما به خاطر حق طلبی خود ما با هم اتفاق نظر داشته باشیم تا این سیاست‌های منطقه که فرهنگ مشترک هم دارن و مردانه هم هستن از ما استفاده نکنن. پیام دومی ما این است که زنان کشورهای منطقه و همسایه فعلا امروز نسبت به زنان در داخل افغانستان وضعیت بهتری دارن. اونا برای ما دادخواهی کنن، با ما هم صدا شوند و با دولت‌هایشان فشار بیارن تا به نحوی به رهبری حکومت طالبان در افغانستان فشار آورده شود تا حقوق زنان را نادیده نگیرند.
So I'll do a very quick translation. So basically, Mobina said that we have common issues in the countries in the region. We have similar challenges and similar issues, especially the challenges that are posed by religion. Oftentimes, religion is used as a justification to push back women, and we have to sort of push back on that and say this is not a religious interpretation. It really is. It's a political agenda, not necessarily a religious agenda. So if we work together and we unite our voices, we can push back on that. The other point that she raised, which I think was important, is that Taliban, in the region, Iran, Pakistan, the Arab countries, the women in these countries are in much better position than women in Afghanistan are today. So the Taliban are talking to some of these countries, but they're still advocating very regressive policies with respect to women in Afghanistan. And so, they're not even willing to use the models of their political allies in these countries when it comes to women. So women in those countries should use this opportunity to advocate for women in Afghanistan. So two messages. One is that to really push back regionally, push back on culture, on progressive policies that use culture and religion to push back women. We do that collectively. And then also asking women in the region, especially those that are in political positions, to advocate for the rights of women in Afghanistan and really push their governments to demand the same for women in Afghanistan. I'll stop here and I'll take questions. Okay, go ahead. Why don't you go ahead, Lina? And I think there are a couple of questions that are written. So
yes,
I'll read that as you speak. So
okay. Actually, I want to start by saying this. I really enjoyed listening to Zubina and Zubaida and Bina through you, Suzanne. This is amazing. I just want to point out a few things that I find really compelling. What Zubaida kept referring to is very important, reclaiming the narrative, because this is exactly what we're hearing from the women from Syria. And the impact of the conflict of women from Syria, reclaiming their own narrative. And this is, I think, the powerful thing where all of us can help. And I want to come back to this as well. The other thing, when you talked about, when also Zubaida talked about the importance of what mainstream media is actually the propaganda in mainstream media and all of this. And there was something that really, really bothered me. And I don't know, Suzanne, if you noticed it, or our friends, Mobina or Zubaida, like a week after, this whole thing blew away, we heard a statement from the head of a UN organization. I don't want to say which organization, but I'll tell Suzanne later, saying that, you know, we are considering negotiating with the Taliban if they tell us that they will respect the rights of women. And I thought this was absolutely shocking, you know, because, you know, you don't do this with an abuser, somebody who's beaten his wife. You don't tell him, you know, you have to promise me you won't do it again. So, and this is connected to the narrative. And this is where I would really like to hear from you, dear friends, you know, how do we address the narrative, the false narrative in places that should know better, that should understand better? And the last thing, you know, well, I liked, you know, how not to invisibilize women and the government negotiators. Luckily, the Lebanese government is not significant enough to negotiate with anybody. So at least we don't have to worry on this front. But, you know, us as women in this region, this was the last question that, that Suzanne asked, but I want to ask you even further. What is it that we can tangibly do, you know, if we want to support in changing the narrative, if we want to support in amplifying the voices of women, you know, if we want, you know, also as a place in the university that connects with civil society and connects with academia, what is it that we can do to help in transforming the narrative? So just a few thoughts, but all of this had so much resonance with all the conflicts in the region, with everything that is happening in terms of invisibilizing women, in terms of, you know, the vile, I would say, role that the media, that the mainstream media is playing. And the fact, I promise you, Suzanne, I will end. There was one thing that reminded me of Algeria, I have to say, and I'm sure us being from the same generation, you must have had the same thought. When we say, you know, when Zubaida was saying, we're fighting the Taliban on behalf of all women in the world. In the 90s, this is what our Algerian sisters were saying. They were saying, we are fighting the extremists on behalf. It's not, do not be naive and think that extremism has geographical boundaries. It doesn't have. And, you know, what does it take, Suzanne, Zubaida, and Mubina? What does it take for these lessons to finally sink in? And now I will shut up.
Thank you so much, because I think you posed some really important questions, but also really summarize some of the key points that everyone should be taking from this. Zubaida, did you want to respond to any of the points that Lina made? You're on.
Yes, absolutely. And I'll try to keep it short. As long as international powerful entities like the UN and other organizations go, I think this was a stark reminder what happened in Afghanistan, and that approach in Afghanistan was a stark reminder of what's fundamentally wrong with the structure of organizations like this. How is it that these big organizations with their headquarters in the West and with many white people leading it sit in other parts of the world and make decisions about the lives and deaths of people in my part of the world? And when everything falls apart, like it did in Afghanistan, yet again, they don't learn a lesson. They don't listen to me. They don't listen to women. They don't listen to those who are marginalized and pushed away and killed by the Taliban. They listen, they follow their own knowledge. They think they know more about us than we do. They think they know what's good for us, what's right for us, what works for us more than they do. This has happened over and over in Afghanistan. This is the exact same reason why everything that these international aid organizations and UN built in Afghanistan during the past 20 years was so fragile, and it collapsed within seconds as soon as their donor governments left, because they didn't do anything structural. They didn't work with the people of Afghanistan. They didn't work with communities. They didn't listen to us, the people of Afghanistan. They work with the corrupt government. And they're following the same model. For them, it's not a corrupt government anymore. It's a terrorist government. They're going to find a way to do their work. But is it going to be sustainable? Is it going to last? Is it going to change the lives of the Afghan people? No. If it didn't work with the corrupt government, how is it that you're trying to convince us that it's going to work with the Taliban? I saw a speech from a UN authority last week that said we see some positive signs in the Taliban and we should take that as a good sign and work with them. No, listen to me. As an Afghan woman, I'm saying there is nothing positive about the Taliban. I'm giving you one more chance to listen to me now. To don't stand with what you think is the authority, to don't stand with what you think is now the power in this country, to stand with the people. I hope that this is an opportunity for these big international entities, which are widely Western, widely white, and they think they know what's right for everyone, to rethink their ways, to actually change their ways, to question themselves and to see, are they really helping people or causing more harm? Is what they're doing causing sustainable change in these communities, or are they providing band-aid solutions that are not gonna last, that are gonna collapse as soon as their donor governments leave countries? And in terms of what can be done to stand in solidarity with Afghans and to help their narratives to have the uptick that it deserves versus the Taliban narrative, versus the mainstream media narrative, I think more of opportunities like this, but wider, with wider audiences, with international audiences, and giving the opportunity for some Afghan women who have been speaking in events like Mubina John, women who are much closer to the reality. I left Afghanistan 3 years ago, Mubina left just months ago, giving the opportunity to people like Mubina to speak up because they're much more closer to the reality, and to not think of language issues as a barrier, but to facilitate it. I think that's the most important thing. And to promote this, in order to be able to do that, I think first we need to promote us. We need to promote Mubina as the reality of Afghanistan, not some terrorist mullah, unlike what I see in the media. Like these white Western journalists go to Afghanistan, walk around, take selfies with the Taliban and post it on media and say, here is the new reality of Kabul. No, that's not the new reality of Kabul. The new reality of Kabul are the women who are protesting every day that these Westerners don't talk about. If you're not going to talk about the reality, then just go. Then follow the lead of your governments and go. Let us do the fight. Because by saying the opposite, by normalizing the Taliban, you're causing more harm. You're damaging the situation.
Thank you, Zubaydah Jan. I'm going to just direct one of your questions to Mubina. So I think Shiva was helping also a little bit with translation, but I think the question that you posed with respect to Algeria and the comment that Zubaydah made about how Afghan women are actually fighting a fight for all the women in the region is an important question. So Zubaydah Jan, یه بحثی که ببخشید مبینا جان، یه بحثی که زبیده جان مطرح کردن این بود که زنان افغانستان الان دارن برای زنان کل منطقه و دنیا می‌جنگن. یعنی اینجوری نیستش که اگه یه گروه تروریستی در افغانستان دارای قدرت هست که فقط تو افغانستان بمونه، قطعاً رو منطقه هم تاثیر میذاره. و لینا که صحبت می‌کرد در مورد الجزیره صحبت کرد و گفتش که در دهه 1990 زنان اون کشور به منطقه میگفتن فقط ما نیستیم، ما هم یه دولت افراطی اسلامگرا داریم، ولی ما داریم با این افراطگرایی برای همه شما مبارزه میکنیم. اگه میشه یه ذره راجع به این یه توضیح بدین که و من خلاصش رو با ترجمه میکنم. که
تشکر از زبیده جان عزیز. من صحبت پیشترشم که در مورد این که باید صدای زنان داخل افغانستان شنیده شوند، صدای اعتراضات باید به گوش جهانیان برسن و یک فرصت داده شود، دقیقاً من موافق هستم با این صحبتایشان. و همچنان زبیده جان گفتن که طالبان هیچ تغییر نکرده و سازمان بزرگ مثل سازمان ملل هم هیچ توجهی به وضعیت افغانستان نکرده. ما با یاد دارم وقتی در شهر مزار شریف قبل از سقوط ما بار با دفتر سازمان ملل، نمایندگی سازمان ملل صحبت می‌کردیم. ما نگرانی‌های ما را می‌گفتیم، ما در نگران آینده بودیم و پیشبینی شرایط امروز. اما ما فکر نمی‌کنیم که اون نشست‌ها و اون ابراز نگرانی داشتن‌ها، اون اخباری که ما شریک می‌ساختیم از وضعیت داخل جامعه در افغانستان، از وضعیت ناامنی برای سازمان ملل کوچکترین دستاورد به خاطر توجه و تلاشش بر افغانستان باشه. ما اتفاقا هر روز که در مورد طالبان صحبت میکنیم یک بار میرم و 20 سال قبل که من سال دوم دانشجو بودم و میبینم که 20 سال قبل که من دانشجو بودم از درس و تحصیل به دور ماندم، امروز همین وضعیت است. 20 سال قبل که مردم به بهانه‌های مختلف ترور شدن، به قتل رسیدن، حتی به شکل گروهی پیش چشم خانواده‌اش هنوز هم ادامه داره. با تفاوتی که او وقت پیش چشم خانواده بود، حداقل یک گوشه دیگه میبرن، یک جای دیگه مردم به قتل میرسن. او وقت هم مردم پشت یک لقمه نان میگشت، هیچ چیزی دیگه به مردم نبود، نه آرزویی، نه امیدی، نه فردایی. فقط فکر میکردن به خود یک لقمه نان بیابن، چون بیکار بودن دیگه. هیچ چیزی در افغانستان امروز هم همین چیزه. به هر صورت تمام بدبختی‌هایی که امروز در داخل افغانستان وجود داره 20 سال قبل هم وجود داشت. طالبان هیچ چیزی تغییر نکردن، نه دیدگاهشون در مقابل زن، نه احساس مسئولیتشون در مقابل مردم افغانستان، به نه کدام رهبری یا حکومتی که هدفشان اما آبادی و آرامی و امنیت افغانستان باشه که نیست. دقیقاً این صدا باید بلند شود و جهان فکر کنه. حرف بیشتر شما زبیده جان که وقتی زنان الجزایر میگفتن ما برای منطقه می جنگیم، ما با جهان می جنگیم. جهانی که بر علیه تروریست امروز صدا بلند میکنن به خاطر منافع خودشان، ما در افغانستان به نحوی صدا بلند میکنیم و میخوایم به جهانیان بگوییم تروریستای دیروز تروریستای امروز است. خطری که جهان دیروز متوجه شده بود فردا هم متوجهشان است. باز بیاین به خاطر جلوگیری از خطرات بیشتر برای بشر، جلوی این اقتدار و حکومت تروریستایی که در افغانستان اینا امروز حاکمیت میکنن و امروز مدعی هستن که به مردم افغانستان امنیت آرامش آوردن، جلوی اینو بگیرن. تشکر.
Thank you. So, Mobina just really wanted to stress some of the points that Zubaydah Jan had made about how, and drawing her own experience, she talked about how in Mazar-e-Sharif they would talk to the UN, but it seems that the UN didn't really pay attention to their concerns about the return of the Taliban. And she pointed out 20 years ago, we were in a, when she was sort of forced to step back from her studies because the Taliban were there, and now they're in the same situation, and really stressed that the Taliban haven't changed, is what they've said, and Zubaydah has mentioned. But the question for you in terms of the women in Algeria, so women in Algeria then pointed out that they're fighting for women in the region. And now women in Afghanistan are not only fighting for women in the region, but the world, but they're also fighting against the world. They have to change that narrative and tell them that when you justify and normalize the Taliban, this is really not the same. So they're really working at this on two levels. They're pushing forward this struggle. من فکر کنم که یه دو تا سوال هست. یه سوالی هستش که there's a question in the question and answer, which I think they're asking actually Zubaydah, but I'd like to ask Mobina this question because she just came from Afghanistan, like not even, I think Zubaydah said 3 months ago, but I don't think it was even 3 months ago. It's just a couple months ago. And up until she came, right before she came, up until August, they were working, and she did wonderful work in 5 provinces. I think I talked about that. So maybe she can talk just a little bit about the work that she was doing in terms of open media. مبینه جان، خانم صدیقه اینجا پرسیدن، یعنی در واقع از خود زبیده پرسیدن که میشه بگین که در افغانستان چی کار میکردین به طور ملموس، کارهای ملموسی که میکردین که به زنان کمک میکرد. و من میخوام این سوال از شما بپرسم چون شما واقعا تازه از افغانستان اومدین. حالا ممکنه خیلی از پروژه ها یا کارهایی که افراد میکردن متوقف شده باشه، ولی یه ذره توضیح بدین که چی کار میکردین توی افغانستان، به خصوص در حوزه میدیا و به خصوص برای زنان، یا اگه میخواین راجع به میدیا هم اگه نگین تو فعالیت‌های دیگه که در رابطه با زنان انجام میدادین ملموس تعریف بکنین که دقیقاً چی کار میکردین.
تشکر. مهم است بگویم برای دوست ما که ما در افغانستان یک جامعه سنتی بوده و در اونجا کمتر صدای زنان مثل امروز به تصویر کشیده میشد، صدایشان بلند میشد از طریق رسانه. ما چند رادیو ویژه زنان در افغانستان داشتیم. یکی از این رسانه‌ها را در بلخ ما مدیریت میکردم و زنان میتونستن که با توجه به وضعیت زندگی خودشان، اما سنتی بودن جامعه، مشکلاتی که در خانواده داشتن، حاضر میشدن با رسانه‌ای که زن در رأس مدیریتش است، مجری و خبرنگارش است، بیاین صحبت کنن و مشکلاتشون رو شریک بسازن و بیاین هم صدا شود. یکی از کارهای مهمی که ما کردیم این بود که ما 20 سال صدای زنان را از رسانه مربوط خودشون بلند کردیم و این خیلی تاثیرگذار بود. چرا؟ هنوز هم زنها در افغانستان نمیتونن به دلایل مختلف به رسانه هایی که مردها هستن یا رسانه های مثل تلویزیون اینا بیاین چهرهشان، تصویرشان و صدایشان در اونجا بلند شود و به دیگرها رسانده شود. ما تلاش میکردیم از آدرس‌های مختلف این صداها را بلند کنیم و دلیلش این بود که ما میخواستیم یک روشنگری در جامعه و یک حمایت از مسائل حقوقی زنان داشته باشیم. زنان باورمند به این باشن که از طریق صدا میتونن دیگرها را به خود عامی بسازن. یکی از کارهای ما بود. کار دیگه که ما میکردیم، ما در سالهای اخیر با ایجاد شبکه‌های رضاکارانه، مثلا ما کمیته حفاظت از افراد ملکی داشتیم در افغانستان، اونایی که در جنگ قربانی بودن در حالی که طرفدار هیچ گروه نظامی، سیاسی، تنظیمی، حزبی نبودن، نه با طالب نه با دولت، اما همیشه در جنگ قربانی بودن، خشونت میدیدن، آواره میشدن، زندگیشان از دست میدادن، همسرشان، فرزندانشان، خانوادهشان. ما به خاطر حفاظت از این مردم و از این خانواده ها کار میکردیم. ما می آمدیم صدای دادخواهی از اینا رو بر رسانه به نمایندگی از اونا بلند میکردیم و به دولت، به حکومت افغانستان هم میگفتیم اینجا عملیات نظامی نکنین، جایی که مردم ملکی زندگی میکنن. و به طالب هم نمایندهایشان یا همون افرادی که میتونستن ارتباط بگیرن پیدا میکردیم، کسایی که بروند و با آنها بگوییم که حالا وقت زندگی مردم است یا وقت مثلا مکتب بچه هاست، وقت کشت و زراعتشان است، اجازه بدین مردم با می زندگی خود باشه، اینجا محل جنگ. یک کاری بود. کار دیگه که ما میکردیم، کمیسیون‌های حمایت از حقوق زنان داشتیم. در یک ماه یک بار جمع میشدیم، میدیدیم که زنان بیشتر کدام مشکل حقوقی را داره، چرا دستگاه قضایی توجه نکرده، چرا مثلا پلیس توجه نکرده در قسمت تعقیب عاملین خشونت، چرا مثلا زنان در قسمت اما قضایا و پرونده‌هایشان توجه جدی نشده، مثل از این کارها. تمام تلاش ما این بود که ما در این جریان 20 سال هم بتانیم زنان بسیج بسازیم، هم صدا بسازیم و به هم دیگر خود بفهمانیم که ما در کنار هم هستیم. اما تأسف این است که قدرت رهبری در اختیار ما نبود. ما زنان رهبر نداشتیم، ما زنان صاحب صلاحیت در حکومت نداشتیم. مردان بودن که سیاست هم معامله کردن، افغانستان هم معامله کردن و تمام حقوق امتیازات یک جامعه را امروز ما متاسفانه هیچی نداریم و اینا را مردها انجام دادن. جنگ کردن، قدرت گرفتن، قدرت به هم تقسیم کردن، حالا هر کاری کردن مرد کردن. اما ما تا امروز میخوایم مسئولیت های انسانی ما را در مقابل زنان افغانستان و مردم افغانستان انجام بدیم.
So Mobina talked about because Afghanistan is a traditional society, oftentimes women don't have the opportunity to be present in media, and she managed a radio station that was predominantly, that was run by her as a woman, and all the people working in that radio station were women, and they offered opportunities for women to come and talk and express their viewpoints and be present, because they don't have those same opportunities in other media. And this was a great opportunity for women to visibilize women, right? To give them voice and give them opportunity to speak about their issues. Another issue that she did was to work in committees to support people who are victims of war, not people who are parties of war, but civilians who are victims of war, and they would try to bring attention to their issues and their needs, and also go and advocate with the government and even the Taliban to say that, you know, these people, this is a civilian area, you shouldn't be fighting here, this is the time for them to go, the kids to go to school, this is the time for them to engage in agriculture, etc. So try to, you know, address and prevent war in areas that were occupied by civilians. And lastly, one of the other things that she talked about is at a commission on women's rights, where they would try to identify the biggest legal barriers for women and try to see what the issues were in terms of the legal problems they had, go to the judiciary and other officials to see how they can facilitate and help women address their legal challenges. And I think, Zubaydah, there's another question that actually Palwasha has asked, and it's similar, but this one is very, did you want to answer this question, Lina? Or
no, I want to leave it. No, of course I can't answer it. I want to leave it to Zubaydah.
Answer. Oh, okay. So maybe yes. So maybe Zubaydah, you can answer this question. So I think both of the questions are very similar. So if each of you really talk about what you can do, or what you did, would be very helpful.
Thank you so much. Happy to respond. Before I moved to the United States 3 years ago, I worked with various international organizations as a campaigner and advocate. The main focus of my work was to promote women's access to reproductive health services, to education, and to health. And as you know, these organizations work in collaboration with different ministries and different local organizations, not so successfully now that we have learned, to promote access of women to reproductive rights. The specific projects I focused on in my official roles in Afghanistan was to promote girls' access to education. We worked to open community-based education classes in remote areas of Afghanistan, for example. We trained midwives so that they can provide health services to women in far areas of Badakhshan, Bamyan, for example, where they can, where access to health facilities are not so easy. We worked to promote, and I worked in another organization called Fredrich Liebert Foundation, which focused on political participation of women. What we did in this organization was to work with parliamentarians, young leaders, and activists, and provide them trainings and opportunities so that they can build a political career. Many of those women ended up as the provincial council members, parliament members, for example, politicians, deputy ministers. Some even became ambassadors. These are some of the examples of the ways I contributed to the work of the organizations that I worked with. In 2005, I founded my own volunteer organization called Hadia, which means gift, and that was to promote volunteerism among young people in Afghanistan and to promote this message among Afghan young people that it is on us and our responsibility to build our country, and that's the only sustainable and long-term way of building a country. What we did was we had members across Afghanistan, 80 official members and hundreds across the country, where they organized their own activities for social reform in their communities. Sometimes those activities were organizing cleaning campaigns. Sometimes it was an event around women's rights issues, a film screening, an open discussion, and things like that. And then what's a part of our work that we didn't promote much because of security reasons was to providing just access to the justice system for women who were survivors of domestic violence. So we worked with women in shelters, for example, and other women who had faced domestic violence, and we would facilitate their access to the justice system so that they could get an advocate, they could go to the court, they could defend, they could ask for their rights. Sometimes it was asking to be able to keep their children when they're getting out of an abusive relationship. Sometimes it was just being able to get a divorce, because it's not easy in Afghanistan for a woman to file a divorce and to be able to take it. So this was the part of our work that we didn't talk about much, but we worked on those. Sometimes we were working also with children who needed legal access to the legal support, especially in the western provinces of Afghanistan, as girls, younger girls were trying to cross border to Iran. They were sometimes unfortunately raped. They had faced sexual abuse, and then they were returned back to Afghanistan, and they ended up in orphanages and shelters, and we would support to take up their cases and help them. This is overall a summary of the type of work that I used to do before moving to the US. And when I came to the United States, I continued to work for an international organization that serves Afghanistan also. The focus was mainly on children's rights issues and children's access to protection and education. Recently, I have moved to Freedom Now, which focuses on Central Asia. And my job is to continue monitoring the human rights situation in Afghanistan, to reporting on the situation, and to researching the situation, and to helping elevate the voices of human rights defenders in Afghanistan and try to evacuate them.
Yes.
Yeah, and I should just say both Mobina, I mean, Mobina was in Afghanistan until really just a few weeks ago, but both Mobina and Zubaydah worked very hard to help others in Afghanistan, especially women human rights defenders, providing them with support. Mobina was very brave. She met with a lot of journalists right after the Taliban takeover to really trying to make sure that the voices of women in the situation were heard by the international community. And Zubaydah here has helped a lot. You know, we did a big fundraiser and transferring money to individual people women human rights defenders, especially, who need them, people who maybe went to India and were beaten up, the LGBT community that needs to be evacuated. So a lot of work like that. So I think you're just getting just a very tiny tip of the iceberg when these two women speak, that they've been working, you know, nonstop for the last few months to help people in very practical ways.
Suzanne, can I intervene and maybe if there are no other questions, there are a few things that, I mean, I won't be long, just very quickly. But, you know, there is a tendency actually to everywhere, and essentially also here, you know, why are there maternal mortality? Why are women who are illiterate, you know, women's organizations doing? Why aren't solving all these problems? Why? It's as if, you know, feminist activists are supposed to solve everything. In the middle of it, that is so set against them, that is so violent, where it's a lot of courage to activists to do something. And I think it circles back to Zubayda's note, which, you know, I don't think is going to leave me. Who's the narrative and whose work is visible, and what is visible, and what's the story that comes out there. Often the story, this narrative, they are false. They invisibilize all the wonderful work that people like Zubayda and Mina are doing. And one thing that I want to conclude with, and that's, you know, for the three of you, and for Shiva, for all the colleagues, for Lama, for all of our friends at FEMENA, we actually, one of the things that we want to put forward is our commitment to at least support in the areas where we work, amplifying the narrative, amplifying the voices, and helping create these spaces. So create these spaces where women like Zubayda and Mubina get to talk about themselves, rather than having their words, you know, through different conduit and interpreted by other people. So Suzanne, you have our full commitment to reproduce this conversation as long as it takes to get the message going, and through as much as possible. And already I'm thinking about our next, the follow-up to this conversation, and we will be talking together about this. As Elise said, I'm raising my hand. Yes, sorry. Okay.
Another 10
okay.
minutes.
Yes, we only have a few minutes left because we have a wonderful event, and I hope you will join us, on feminist blogging in the MENA region. We have a student who is saying, you know, as Afghan students abroad, how many people in the country who are, you know, we know many people in the country who are desperate, in desperate need of evacuation. Is there any way we could help them? Are there any institutions such as university that could help us with this? So I guess that's something that we, through our colleague Fatima Amro, we do promise that we're going to get back to you with conversations around this. I want to give the floor for 2 minutes only for Fatima. I think she wants to add something, and then give the floor to you, Suzanne, again to conclude.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for everything. This was great. I just wanted to say that I think there's a student here with us who would like to speak or add something. Eli, is it okay if we unmute her? She's raising her hand in the attendees section.
Yes, of course. 1 second.
Sure.
It's Palwasha.
Hi, Palwasha,
Yes,
you're ready.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello, this is Palwasha Popal. I had a short question to Ms. Zubayda. So activism is a very important part of my life, and I believe that it will be a very important part of my career as well. So I really appreciate both Ms. Mubina and Ms. Zubayda answering my question, and I really got a great insight into their work. But I noticed one thing in Ms. Zabaida's speech where she brought up the matter of ethnicity. So I was curious to know, since I'm already working in this field, like for girls' education, so this information is very important for me. So do you think that the scale of neglection and abandonment of the Afghan women differ from like one ethnic group to another, or is it within the geographical parameters, just like what I was thinking? So according to me, in more rural areas and the areas where there's like less schools, girls are less aware of the world and education, women are less vulnerable than the capital city, and for example Herat and Mazar Sharif and cities like that. But this is something very new. I want to ask if she thinks that the scale of abandonment is different, like if she thinks women within one ethnic group are more advanced or privileged than the others. Apart from the political side of it, I'm speaking of the more humanitarian subject and the activism. If she thinks that's the case, I just want to ask, and I would love to know why and how, so that we work in this field more. I would love to listen to her. Thank you.
We just have a couple of minutes left.
Maybe Zubaydah, you can respond quickly and we can try to continue this conversation. It's an important question.
Absolutely. I hope that I have understood the question correctly. I have lived and worked in Afghanistan for many years, and I have worked with international organizations. I have traveled across the country. I think I have met little girls in Kandahar to get to school, they would walk for hours, and I have met the same age girls in Bamyan. So I think across Afghanistan, girls have been impacted by the return of the Taliban. It's not like in some parts of the country, women are less impacted. I have not heard a single case of an Afghan family from any part of Afghanistan during the past 20 years leaving the area where they live. Doesn't matter if it's Kandahar or Herat or Bamyan or Daikundi, leaving their home and a government-controlled area to go live under the Taliban because they prefer the Taliban more. I don't think this is true. I don't think nowhere in Afghanistan among any ethnic group there is acceptance for the way that the Taliban rule. The Taliban have not spared anyone. The Taliban have attacked everyone. They have attacked girls' school and girls' education in Kandahar as much as they have attacked it in Faryab, as much as they have attacked it in Bamyan. So the regular average people of Afghanistan, regardless of their ethnicity, have been impacted by the Taliban. Yes, there have been targeted killings of Hazaras during the past 20 years, and that's something we cannot deny. They have went after certain specific groups more than others. Just in the recent months, a school of Hazara ethnic group was attacked and 50 girls were killed. ISIS claimed the responsibility for that, but regardless of who did it, the Taliban created that opportunity. More than once, the Taliban attacked 6 Hindus, Hazaras of Afghanistan in their places of worship. Today, we see that Uzbek Uzbek ethnic group, people from Uzbek ethnic group are being pushed out of their lands, their homes that they have lived in for years and years by Kuchis, and people who oppose that are being arrested by the Taliban. So this is a fact that we cannot deny, and we should be brave enough to speak about it. Because while we all agree that the Taliban have not spared anyone, there are people who have been more impacted by the rule of the Taliban and the attacks of the Taliban. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Palwasha. I think that was an important question. So I hope that in future events, we can actually talk about some of these other kind of questions. These more philosophical or, the types of questions in terms of, what's going on with ethnic groups, who do you work with, how does culture impact the situation of women, and how has it impacted the situation of women, or how are women faring in different ethnic groups? Because I know ethnicity remains a huge issue and also a divider in Afghanistan. So thank you for bringing that up. I think it's important to have those discussions here. I really want to thank Asfari Institute and AUB and Lena Eli, and also our speakers and everybody who helped make, and Fatma who helped make this event possible. I think it was a very good event, and I think it's a good start. I'm very happy that everybody is so interested in hearing about what these women did in their country, or are doing now in their country if they're still there. And that you're interested in this very practical experience. I think in the next sessions, we'll probably offer a lot more of that practical experience so that you can think about it and maybe take it forward into the future when you want to do your own activism. I'm going to stop now because I know you have another event, but we look forward to the next event. And I think eventually, hopefully we can have it so that the students are facilitating these events.
Yes.
Yeah, and maybe we can have Mobina back when also, to participate again when we have interpretation, so that she can have an easier time of also talking to the non-Farsi speakers or non-Dari speakers.
Yes, you're right. That was an amazing start. I'm very happy. I also thank the students. I know that they're starting their exams soon, so best of luck to everybody. Zubaida, Mobina, thank you ever so much. And Suzanne, you have to expect our call tomorrow morning for the next steps, because I really think there's a lot of work that we can do on this. So thank you all ever so much. We have to close.
Before you go, I also want to thank AUB. I think it's really important what you've done to support these students. And I know you've taken extra measures to make sure that they can stay in Lebanon for a while and be safe and not be forced to go back. So as somebody who's working with Afghans and who feels especially close because we have the same language with neighboring countries, I really want to thank you for doing that. It's really, and I think more people, a lot of universities are trying to do similar things. So I think AUB can be a nice model. Thank you for being so generous and so humane.
And we'll see you again in just a few weeks. Thank you, everybody. Good luck in your exams. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Khuda Hafiz. Khuda Hafiz.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.